Guys, I don't think you hate gaming journalists enough. These people are the epitome of your average Reddit millennial modern audience slop enjoyer who hates gamers as a whole. This profession used to be one that was widely respected by everyone universally because they were the outlet for gamers to voice their opinions to the wider audience. They used to be a platform by gamers for gamers. However, that's becoming less and less true as the years go on. The days of gaming journalists speaking out to gamers as peers are long gone. Now they're just a corporate mouthpiece that panders to AAA corporations in order to keep their exclusive access to games, while also consistently putting out low quality clickbait slop in a desperate attempt to generate clicks on their dying website. Sometimes I question if they even play video games anymore. Remember that one embarrassing video where the game journalist playing Cuphead had a hard time getting past just the tutorial? You know, the same one where a literal 5-year-old almost beat him in? Or how about that one Doom 2016 gameplay showcase from Polygon where it looks like someone gave their grandma the controller and just recorded her gameplay? Or how about that one IGN review for a Pokemon game where one of their main criticisms was too much water?
Stop it. Get some help.
Now, I'm not saying that you have to be a pro gamer or have some high-minded intellectual analysis for your reviews, but at the bare minimum, if you're going to put out a gaming showcase, at least have someone who knows the controls to play the game. Is that too much to ask for? And we're supposed to be taking these people seriously? No, and everybody knows that we shouldn't. That's why every gaming publication has been on a downward spiral lately. And that's where we arrive at the current day, just after the Summer Games Fest, which was one of their better shows in recent time. And don't just take it from me, according to a poll from Jeff Keighley himself on X, a majority of the people rated the show at least a B or above. And I could see why. It revealed many upcoming games that actually looked interesting as a gamer. A lot of titles shown here had grit, personality, visual attractiveness, and most importantly, fun looking gameplay. It felt like game developers were finally trying to make games for gamers and not the modern audience or game journalists. And you know, there were some misses here and there, but overall the games announced here looked great. However, Kotaku seems to think otherwise. In fact, they hated the Summer Games Fest because they just published an article saying that the vibes of it were rotten and that it was boring. Now obviously sometimes people have their own opinions that are different from mine, and that's okay. So why is it that this journalist hated this show so much, even though most other gamers thought it was pretty good? Well, in their article, they said, and I quote, "Everyone was running on fumes. People were desperate. Jeff, the master of throwing big, glitzy game events, was unable this time to distract from the truth. Things aren't alright in the gaming industry. Okay, pray, do tell me what's wrong with the gaming industry right now, because in my opinion, I think the industry is starting to heal. We want more games with edge. We want more games to be visually appealing. We want more games to just focus on being cool. And for way too long now, we've been getting way too many generic, lame, and boring slop titles that almost always flop on release. People are speaking with their wallets now, and what they're saying is that they want more of these types of games." The writer also goes on to say, "It was an empty show that felt lifeless and sad. It's clear that publishers are chasing trends and only greenlighting and funding games that look like other things that people bought." Well, yeah, they want money, and the only way to get that is to make things people want. I think most publishers want to avoid another Concord situation. Like, no one wants that. Anyways, this guy ends the article with, "Jeff seemed desperate from the jump to convince fans watching at home that the lack of big AAA games wasn't a bad thing. He dedicated the opening minutes of the show praising indie games and how awesome they are and how popular they are." And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the real reason why this Kotaku games journalist didn't like this show. It's because there weren't that many AAA games announced.
You serious?
What a completely disconnected and out of touch statement. Remember earlier when I said that games journalists nowadays don't represent the opinions of the average gamer, but rather as a corporate mouthpiece that panders to AAA publishers? The thing is that gamers don't really care whether or not a game was developed by a AAA studio, they just want good games in general without any of the bullshit. And as of late, the indie and AA studios have been doing an outstanding job at giving gamers what they want. A fun game without any of the microtransactions, bloated systems, or political posturing. A few examples such as Schedule 1, Expedition 33, Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon, Split Fiction, Balatro, Repo, and so many more. All of these games were made by smaller studios that explored creative ideas and focused on the fun aspect of the game. That's why each of them exploded in popularity. Indie and AA games are setting the new standard for the video game industry that you don't need huge $100 million budgets or thousands of developers to be successful. All you need is creativity and passion. But unfortunately, sometimes creative ideas aren't as flashy or as high budgeted like AAA games are, and those game journalists hate that. They despise the fact that gamers are starting to be vigilant with their wallets now and not consume product like a good little NPC they want us to be. They loathe the fact that publishers have to actually cater to their audience or else they risk losing their investment and will have to lay off some people due to that. These game journalists don't care about you, they care about themselves. There was an article published on GameDeveloper.com called "The Deprofessionalization of Video Games Was on Full Display at PAX East," which was an article lamenting about the fact that game development is starting to shed a lot of its creative jobs. Professions such as artists, writers, and musicians are being pushed to the wayside because they're seen as less essential to the development process. The writer notes that these roles seemed vulnerable because on these small teams, they were the roles that the developers mentioned doing in some sort of shared joint fashion, saying that, quote, all three risk compartmentalization as asset creators, their work treated as products you can purchase off the store shelf. Now I do have sympathies for the creatives that are getting laid off in droves. In a perfect world, these people wouldn't have to lose their jobs. But we don't live in a perfect world, we live in reality, and the reality is that the video games industry is a business, and like any business, you have to provide value to the company you're working at. And one of the best ways to do that is by being able to perform the jobs of multiple roles. Back when the gaming industry was in its infancy, where games were made by 3 dudes in their mother's basement, those guys had to do everything themselves. The music, the art, the story, the UI, the level design, the character design, the gameplay. Everyone had to wear multiple hats on these projects in order to get it out of the door. And it worked because it was faster, more efficient, and less costly. They didn't have to get approval from 5 different layers of corporate bureaucracy or a council of middle management in order to communicate their ideas. All they needed to do was walk over to John next door and tell him about the idea. Or better yet, just implement it themselves. That's how it's always been since the inception of video games, and that's how it still is. For example, the developers over at Sandfall Interactive had to perform the roles of multiple jobs because they were very limited in resources and manpower. The CEO of the company, Guillaume Brochet, didn't just sit in investor calls and meetings all day, he actually rolled up his sleeves and contributed to the game himself. He was the creative director, the game design director, the cinematic director, as well as one of the main story writers, and he did a few mocap performances for some of the minor characters. Overall, the number of people who worked on this game approximated to around 400 people, including outsourced work. This is what the most efficient form of game development looks like, whether you want to admit it or not. Meanwhile, Assassin's Creed Shadows had over 7,000 people in studios literally in every corner of the world involved with this title. There were so many individuals that the end credits for this game was over 2 hours long.
There are too many of them. What are we going to do?
I'm sorry, but you just don't need that many people working on a video game. It was only until corporations and investors were involved where these specialized roles became a thing because they need to justify hiring hundreds of redundant or vestigial roles. The game's journalists might tell you that this is a good thing because it adds more jobs into the gaming industry, and I would agree with that if it stayed that way. But unfortunately, the problem is that thousands of developers are getting laid off every year because the publishers were massively overhiring to work on projects, which overinflated their budgeting expenses by an exponential amount. Then, when those same projects turn out to be huge commercial flops, they lose hundreds of millions of dollars, which leads to those very same jobs that were added to be removed. I would argue that this is the consequence of over-professionalization, because AAA games nowadays are becoming way too expensive for their own good. They've become too bloated and cumbersome to really be able to adapt to the constantly shifting landscape of the gaming industry. And because of that, they oftentimes end up underperforming and failing to capture a large enough audience. This whole deprofessionalization issue is simply the market correcting itself. I would argue that the industry has become too professional. For far too long now, games and games media have felt so corporate, so sanitized, and even inauthentic. It didn't feel like they were made by your average gamer that just wanted to make good games that everyone liked. Titles like Starfield, Avowed, Concord, Dragon Age the Veilguard don't feel like they're made by gamers for gamers. It felt like they were made by a council of soulless corporate entities and HR departments who want to dictate what you should and shouldn't like. These were games that failed to resonate with the average gaming audience, but for some reason the game journalists ate them all up every single time. And that's the problem. AAA games nowadays aren't made to cater to gamers, they're made to cater to game journalists and the mythical modern audience. But that doesn't move units. They aren't the ones buying games. We are. And the reason why so many people have been laid off recently is because these titles don't sell. They don't offer what gamers are looking for, like what indie titles have been doing for years now. That's why gaming is becoming deprofessionalized. It's because the tourists that these publishers sacrificed their own fans over never showed up, and now everyone is out of a job. But these journalists will never admit that. They'll never acknowledge the real reasons why these games failed, because it's inconvenient to them and the establishment that they protect. This is all just self-preservation to keep their jobs without having to adapt to the market or create something that people actually enjoy. Remember the whole entire cancel campaign that these game journalists tried to propagate with Black Myth Wukong? Yeah, well, we all saw how well that turned out. These people don't reflect the opinions of the public, and they haven't for a very long time. The writer then ends the article with this. One shouldn't need to be a social media wonderkind, a AAA veteran with years of hard-to-earn experience, or a jack of all trades to have a career in game development. That path does bring some wildly inventive games, but leaves us with a community of developers hustling on gig work to keep the dream alive. You see, the thing is that company loyalty is dead nowadays, because your loyalty is worth the amount of money they save from firing you. The only way to adapt is by being an industry mercenary where you're essentially just hopping from company to company every few years. That's just how it is because you guys have made it this way. AAA companies have been releasing the same shitty slop that no one likes. Then the game journalists gaslight them into thinking that this shit is gold. Then they wonder why it fails disastrously. You have no one else to blame but yourself. Indies have been thriving under this new paradigm shift because they actually give players what they're looking for. And if you want to help restore the professional nature of the AAA games industry, then I think you should start by looking in the mirror. But that's just me. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know down below and make sure to like, comment, subscribe for more content in the future. See ya.